It's February, 8 in the morning, 28 degrees north latitude. Our boat, cutting through the waves of the Atlantic Ocean, is headed for the rugged silhouettes that stretch across the horizon. We've come into view of the Canary Islands. Anchored in the Atlantic Ocean more than 1,000 kilometers south of Spain and 150 kilometers off the coast of West Africa, the archipelago of the Canaries is made up of 7 islands. 7 volcanic islands, each with its own specific identity, its own character. Even though the Canaries have been populated for several thousand years, they remained off the well-traveled maritime routes, lost on the fringes of the known world, until the Spanish colonization in the early 15th century. We'll begin our visit with Tenerife, the largest of the 7 islands. Our boat puts in at the port of Santa Cruz de Tenerife. In 1494, the conquistador Alonso Fernández de Lupo defeated the indigenous tribes of the island and gave the future town its name by erecting a wooden cross on these then deserted shores. Santa Cruz de Tenerife was the capital of the islands up until 1927, when the 2 provinces of Eastern and Western Canaries were established. Down through the centuries, Santa Cruz's activity and importance evolved according to the relations of Spain with its New World colonies. There were prosperous times fueled by the sugarcane, grape, and banana trade, and leaner periods when many islanders emigrated to Latin America, in particular to Cuba and Venezuela. In the light of the February sun, Santa Cruz gives the impression of a quaintly charming town, something like the spas and seaside resorts that flourished in Europe at the end of the 19th century. But we mustn't be fooled by appearances. In a few weeks, swarms of tourists will overrun the streets of Santa Cruz and the many hotels that line the beaches on the south coast of the island. But Tenerife and all the other Canary Islands are certainly not limited to this cliché postcard image. Here, nature is lush, varied, and grandiose, a treasure that thrust up from the bowels of the earth and emerged from the surface of the ocean millions of years ago.
The first islands to emerge from the sea were Fuerteventura and Lanzarote, probably around 22 million years ago. Then, other islands appeared: Gran Canaria, Tenerife, and La Gomera. The youngest are La Palma and El Hierro. We should mention that down through the long volcanic history of the Canaries, the largest and most frequent eruptions took place on Gran Canaria and Tenerife.
The last eruption of Pico del Teide, at 3,718 meters, Spain's highest peak, took place back in the 18th century. The huge caldera that stretches out at its feet resembles a field of lava punctuated by scree and phantasmagorical rock formations. The wide palette of colors that streaks these natural sculptures is due to the variety of rock that composes them, as well as the minerals they contain.
The Teide is really a beautiful volcano, a magnificent volcano that was formed over the past 145,000 years. Each island has its own specific charm as far as volcanoes are concerned. And of course, all the islands are worth seeing. But Teide does have that special something, and that is its majesty.
Over time, the destructive force of the volcano has turned out to be a blessing in disguise, fertilizing the farmlands with the rich mineral nutrients contained in the lava. Now, we'll make a visit to Orotava before finishing up our day back at Santa Cruz. Orotava, which was founded in the 16th century, has managed to preserve its old town, where the Baroque-style churches stand side by side with the noble dwellings and their authentic Canarian architectural features. Like here, the Casa de los Balcones, with its ironwork balconies and shaded patios. We're back in Santa Cruz. The peaceful atmosphere we found upon our arrival has vanished in the course of the day, and the city has been completely transformed thanks to the magic of the carnival. Carnival, imported by the conquistadors in the 15th century, despite the opposition of the church, became popular immediately. It was outlawed during Franco's era, then revived in the early 1970s to become the world's second largest carnival after Rio de Janeiro. Murgas, actors and musicians playing out satires of the island's politics, comparsas, costumed processions, the entire population turns out for this event. The Carnival of Tenerife is a huge fiesta made by the people and for the people. In the morning, we're heading out of the port of Tenerife, and the city seems to have calmed down. But this is merely a breather. The carnival festivities will go on for nearly a month. spend the day sailing along the coastline of Tenerife. A grandiose spectacular with the jagged mountains plunging into the deep blue of the Atlantic Ocean. Soon the captain will head west toward our next port of call, the island of Gran Canaria.
L'ensemble de l'équipage, puisque derrière il y a toute une équipe, donc on peut les applaudir tous, toutes et tous très très fort. Au nom de notre commandant, de l'ensemble de l'équipage, nous vous souhaitons une excellente soirée de gala qui va se poursuivre au restaurant et ensuite ici même pour votre soirée dansante. À la vôtre, mesdames et messieurs. Chin chin,
We've sailed through the night, and now we're within sight of Las Palmas. Like Tenerife, Gran Canaria lives mainly from agriculture and tourism. Las Palmas, considered by many to be the true capital of the Canaries, is a metropolis of many facets, not easy to pin down. It doesn't have a clearly defined old town like Orotava. Here, all the styles and periods exist side by side. In the Plaza Santana, the cathedral with its neo-Gothic facade rubs shoulders with stately 17th century mansions and Art Deco buildings. Now that we've gotten a first impression, we'll head for what is without a doubt the city's finest monument, La Casa Colón. This vast dwelling, which was the residence of the governor of Gran Canaria, is a magnificent example of late 15th century architecture. But it owes its fame to Christopher Columbus, who stayed over here on his first voyage to the New World.
Christopher Columbus left the port of Palos de la Frontera in 1492 with his 3 caravels, the Pinta, the Niña, and the Santa Maria. While he was passing by Lanzarote, the Santa Maria had a problem with her rudder. Columbus decided to put in at Gran Canaria. He was sure he would be able to find help on this very populated island, that there were craftsmen and shipwrights here skilled in repairing ships like his caravels.
On each of his voyages, Christopher Columbus took the route of the Canaries. He thus drew attention to the favorable geographic location of these islands, situated at the crossroads of 3 continents. All through the 16th century, the Canaries were an important landmark for navigators and a stepping stone to America. They provided food, boats, men, and products like bananas and sugarcane, destined for the nascent American economy. The Casa Colón Museum is a tribute to the voyages of that famous navigator. But with its displays of sculptures from Mexico and Ecuador, the museum also pays homage to the civilizations which, after the arrival of Columbus, were annihilated by the conquistadors, the pre-Columbian civilizations. The conquest of the New World brought with it armed conflicts and massacres that were a rerun of what happened some years before in the Canaries. When the Spanish arrived in the 15th century, these islands had already been settled for over 4,000 years.
There is indeed a mystery concerning the pre-Spanish population, but it is not, in fact, such a deep mystery. The chroniclers of the time, the early voyagers, state quite clearly that the inhabitants of these islands didn't know how to sail and that they developed in a very isolated way. They stress the fact that there was no contact between them, and so each community, and therefore each island, had its own name. It wasn't until later on that the term Guanche came into common usage to designate the Canary Islanders in general.
The early inhabitants arrived in several successive waves. It's thought that the most recent, made up of Berbers from North Africa, took place around 1000 BC. Archaeologists have unearthed an extraordinary site near Galdar, the capital when the Spanish arrived.
The museum and archaeological park, Cueva Pintada, has one of the most important examples of the artistic and symbolic forms of expression of the ancient Canarians. It's a man-made cave carved into the volcanic tuff and decorated with a wealth of geometric designs. Geometric motifs were very common in the cultural expression of Gran Canaria, but there are some human figures as well. This cave is really an amazing, unique site of a society where the sacred, the political, and the religious blended together. It's rather easy to see that this was some sort of meeting place, a place of worship, to honor the almighty divinities. Their ceremonies were meant to ensure that the established order would carry on in a society with a strict hierarchy.
In the morning, we leave Gran Canaria and sail toward the island of La Palma.
This is Atlantic Ocean, so you always have a wind, you always have some swell, but as you can see on this cruise, we pass it, you can feel a little bit, but the ship is good for this kind of cruising. The problem is when the wind change and the wind comes from south. Then they are open and some ports are even closed when it is southerly wind. Usually this is a couple of days per year.
Our entry into the port of Santa Cruz de la Palma promises to be smooth, just as the captain had predicted. The Spanish conquest, the enslavement of the original inhabitants, the strategic position on the sea route to America. The history of Santa Cruz de la Palma is similar to that of the other Canary Islands. However, this island does have its own particular charm. The houses with their traditional facades and pine wood balconies, the cobblestone streets leading to the Plaza de España in the shadow of the magnificent Church del Salvador. For its inhabitants, La Palma is the Isla Bonita, the pretty island. Pretty and mysterious in the morning mist that clings to the Caldera di Taburiente. Gliding gracefully on the invisible currents threading through the atmosphere, birds of prey soar majestically above the huge volcanic cirque. Like an island floating on the surface of the water, the black rock of the volcano juts up from this sea of white clouds that stretches all the way to the horizon. This breathtaking landscape is home to the Roque de los Muchachos Observatory, which now boasts the largest collection of telescopes in the Northern Hemisphere.
The conditions on La Palma, where the observatory was installed in 1985, are simply ideal for astrophysics. The high altitude, around 2,000 meters, the clean and transparent atmosphere, very low turbulence and urban pollution, unlike other places in the world. So with all these positive points, astronomers back in the 70s realized the advantages of this site, and they made a concerted effort to create this observatory.
Once back down at sea level, we continue on our cruise through the heart of the Canary Islands. In the morning, we drop anchor at La Gomera. The Phoenician navigators already knew about La Gomera, and it figures on the maps of the Greek geographer Ptolemy. The island gets its nickname Isla Colombina from Christopher Columbus, who stopped here several times. San Sebastián de la Gomera, perched on a promontory, is a small town. So small and quiet that the inhabitants call it La Villa. Even though the island does have fertile land, where down through the centuries, sugarcane, bananas, and all the Mediterranean crops were cultivated, during the 20th century, the Gomerans emigrated massively. Some went to Tenerife, but most opted for what the Canarians consider the archipelago's 8th island, South America. La Gomera hasn't had a volcanic eruption for 2 million years. As a result, the steep, jagged landscape is scarred by erosion and deeply grooved with a number of canyons. Here, in the Grigoriy National Park, we have a striking example of this impressive relief.
Grigoriy Park became a national park in 1981. In 1986, it was declared a World Heritage Site, a designation that gave it added prestige. Often, people who don't really know the Canaries, and in particular La Gomera, imagine very arid, volcanic landscapes. But here, as you can see, the humid atmosphere favors the growth of a wide variety of moss, and the air is very healthy.
Nurtured by the humidity and the fertility of the volcanic soil, a wide variety of crops grow on the terraced mountainsides and in the canyons and ravines that crisscross the island. This very rugged terrain gave rise to the Simbel, a whistling language created in La Gomera.
We use the whistling language on account of the terrain. It allows us to communicate with someone on the opposite slope up here in the mountains. Climbing up and down takes a lot of time. Whistling shortens the distances. It's our way of communicating.
The entire population of La Gomera was concentrated in the center of the island. Farming was the main activity. They had no other means of subsistence. For a long time, the islanders didn't practice fishing. The inland farmers herded cattle, and so for a long time they communicated via the whistling language. I just told him that he has to go give a hand to Juventa. I learned the whistling language in the mountains. Now I'm a professor of Silbo, but I didn't learn how to whistle at school. The first thing I teach is how to whistle, to produce the sound. Once the student has that down, I teach them how to modulate in order to form words. It's really hard to get around on La Gomera. Modern means of communication arrived fairly recently. That's why the whistling language survived right into the 1950s.
We leave La Gomera. Continuing on our way, we set an easterly course toward the last port of call on our cruise, Lanzarote. Unlike Tenerife and La Gomera with their craggy shores, the island of Lanzarote offers a much tamer, almost monotonous landscape. Just a few small volcanic cones here and there break the line of the horizon. For many centuries, Lanzarote, situated around 100 kilometers from mainland Africa, suffered pirate attacks, which explains why the original capital, Teguise, was established inland. It was not until the 19th century that it was transferred to Arrecife, the island's main port. Fishing was the island's economic mainstay for ages, but those days are gone. Now, most of the islanders work in the tourist trade. The island's main tourist attraction is the Timanfaya National Park. Between 1730 and 1736, there was intense volcanic activity in the western part of Lanzarote. The village priest of Yaiza witnessed the events. On the first day of September, between 9 and 10 o'clock at night, the earth suddenly opened near Timanfaya, 2 miles from Yaiza. An enormous mountain emerged from the ground, flames coming from its summit. It continued burning for 19 days.
The landscape we see here is arid, lunar. like something on another planet. Before the eruption, this was the most fertile zone of the island. It was covered with crops of cereals. More than 400 houses and a good number of small villages were destroyed by the volcano and swallowed up by the lava. It was a real catastrophe. Ashes rained down on the island for 6 years. So the most fertile zone disappeared along with the springs that supplied water. A lot of people fled to other islands, to Venezuela and Cuba. All that explains why, for a long time, Lanzarote was the poorest island of the Canaries.
The Montañas de Fuego, situated in the heart of the Timanfaya Park, are still active. 10 centimeters down, the temperature is 150 degrees, and 500 degrees just a few meters deeper. The park ranger's little experiment is a striking demonstration of this.
Cámara ready, listo.
With its emblem, the bell tower of the San Miguel Church, Teguise, the former capital, is undoubtedly the island's loveliest town. The choice of colors and materials, the simplicity of the forms. From the church's facade to the most modest homes, this town is a work of art in itself. Cesar Manrique, a painter and architect from Lanzarote, continued in his own way the work accomplished over the centuries by the inhabitants of Teguise. He undertook comprehensive projects incorporating certain traditions and the natural heritage of his island into his work.
La arquitectura tradicional de Lanzarote.
Lanzarote's traditional architecture is a very appropriate response to the island's climate. So it is integrated, it blends in and is very well adapted to the need of insulation and to the island's winds. Cesar Manrique used the same concepts in designing this house, and that's where it's a very modern notion. He uses the hollows of an old lava bubbles where the farmers grow their fig trees to make a living space. That's the significant innovation. Then he decorated that space according to his own modern and pop taste. But in the end, he's doing the same thing that the island's farmers have been doing all along, responding in an efficient way to the climatic conditions, but with a radically modern perspective.
The inhabitants of Lanzarote are artists. And judging from these beautiful patterns of stone that formed this gigantic mineral tableau on the slopes of the volcano, it could hardly be otherwise. And yet these men are merely doing their job.
Of course, the land was almost completely abandoned following the eruptions. And in spite of that, in certain patches around the volcanoes, hollows appeared where they would grow muscatel grapes for wine. In the spots where there was more sand, they were able to plant grapevines, fig trees, and guava trees. They needed the walls to keep the sand in place and to protect the soil from the wind. It keeps the buds from breaking when they're the most fragile. They don't get much rain here. The little volcanic stones retain the humidity from the dew. The more stones there are, the more moisture is stored. It hasn't rained a drop in more than a year. Everything is bone dry. I haven't traveled much, but I think this spot is really one of a kind. We built it with our own hands, not with machines, but with our own bare hands.
Cesar Manrique is a true creator. But his finest achievement was revealing the beauty of Lanzarote to the inhabitants of the island.
In the late 1960s, we didn't think the island was worth much. Manrique opened our eyes to Lanzarote's aesthetic potential. He highlighted its natural and cultural heritage, which had been more or less neglected up until then. And so he really inspired the inhabitants of Lanzarote to be proud of their island and conscious of its worth.